Well, thank you for joining us on Morning Light. We're honored to have you.
Oh, Jeff, it's my honor. Thank you.
This book felt like I was reading your diary, your journal, intensely personal, more, I think, even than the first book, which had a lot of policy and covered a lot more political ground. But this one was personal. Why did you go there? And was there, at any point, did you think I'm saying a little too much in it? Because it was deep. I mean, you're going into your devotional life, your inner life, your playlist. It's all here. Why'd you write it?
I had the opportunity to write my life story with my autobiography. And I was having a conversation that I actually recount in the preface of the book with a great friend. And he said, you know, I'm very interested in reading your autobiography and the history of your service in Congress and in Indiana and as vice president, because I like history and I like politics. But he said, the book I really want to read is how do you and Karen have the family life and the marriage that you have, living the life that you've lived? And first off, I was humbled by that. I gave God the glory. But it planted a seed in me for what became the book, Go Home for Dinner, and the opportunity to write it with my daughter, who lived through all of those years, and including through some tumultuous times in those years, was a particular joy. But you know, I'm being here at Grove City College. I've just spent the last semester talking to young people about how you bring a Christian worldview to public service, how you formulate and defend your own positions, but also I hope we're able to convey to young people also that if you'll take these principles and you'll put them into practice, you can live out your faith in the public square and not just survive, but thrive. And our family's been blessed in that regard, and we wanted to share that in Go Home for Dinner.
Well, today for the full half hour, a special Morning Light conversation with the 48th Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence. I sat down with the Vice President at Grove City College earlier this month, where he was teaching a political science class at the college's new Center for Faith and Public Life with Grove City's President, Paul McNulty.
And you asked him about Christians in politics and his own experience very early on in his political life with campaigning and losing back-to-back races for Congress. So is there a right and wrong way to engage in politics?
The principles, though, come out of struggle, failure. I think the most gripping chapters were the chapters about your failed congressional campaigns. And you say, look, I've got 2 back-to-back campaigns. And I remember reading something a long time ago that you wrote after that time, reflecting on negative campaigning. People looking at that from the outside in would say that is an absurd way to look at politics, that you can't win if you apply the Mike Pence principles of winning. But the whole book seems to disprove the premise that you have to do what you've got to do to get elected.
Well, Jeff, I want to commend you for your great work, the whole topic of civility in public life. But I'm someone that believes that democracy depends on heavy doses of civility. It's one of the reasons why during my years in Congress, I had to learn the rules of debate on the floor of the Congress, where you speak to someone as the gentle lady from Pennsylvania and ask, will the gentleman from Indiana yield? It's very formalistic, but it's all a way through Western tradition that civility is preserved. And I did try and write very candidly in both of my books about lessons learned early on. When I first got involved in politics, despite the fact that I had come to a personal faith in Jesus Christ as a freshman in college, the opportunity in my late 20s to run for office, I got caught up politics of the moment, and we came under attack, and we attacked back in kind. And I lost
Did you
those
feel
2
something
elections.
there? Did you feel in that moment when the consultant is showing you the proof of the direct mail piece or showing you the radio ads? What was the conversation with Karen like at that point?
Well, I will tell you that in the heat of the battle, I don't remember feeling much hesitation. But I remember my young bride saying, "I'm not sure that's you." And I said, and I bought into the rationalization. This is just how it has to be done. And when it was all over, we'd lost 2 successive elections. That's when I began to really reflect on my faith. I thought we hadn't just lost 2 elections, I'd actually lost a lot of self-respect.
Yeah.
And that's when I wrote that essay, Confessions of a Negative Campaigner, where I said campaigns ought to first demonstrate the basic decency of the candidate. You ought to do unto your opponent as you'd have them do unto you, right? Campaigns ought to be about things that are more important than your election. And then they can be about winning. I'm a very competitive guy. I love to compete and win. But I think the guardrails around that of civility and standing on policies and principles that are of greater consequence than your success or failure have really guided me. And I hope that, and as God brought around these opportunities for us 10 years later, being elected to Congress 6 times, being elected governor, and being elected vice president of the United States, and hewing to those principles proves, I hope, particularly to these young people, that you can live out your faith, including in the way you conduct yourself in the public square, and still experience things you never imagined possible.
It certainly really gives you some insight into Mike Pence and how God used him through this journey and how he depended upon God every step of the way.
Well, and it was a dependence that came out of his depending on himself, relying on polls, relying on consultants, relying on advice that was not Christian, and then course correcting, which then led him to this very productive period of public service.
Yeah, certainly made a difference in his life. Well, most regard the Trump-Pence administration as one of the most effective, one marked by the vice president's loyalty and effectiveness in coalition building and delivering votes in Congress. Well, there was one day, though, January 6, 2021, that changed that relationship forever.
Well, for me, it came down not to January 2021, it was January 2017. When this grandson of an Irish immigrant, who I was named after, who went on to be a congressman, a governor, was taking the oath to be the vice president of the United States. Put my left hand on Ronald Reagan's Bible, surrounded by my family, and I raised my right hand. And I swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. But it ended with a prayer, Jeff. So help me God. And an oath is a promise that we make to the people, but it's also a promise that we make to God. So for me, early on, when there was some speculation in early December that somehow as vice president I had the authority to choose whether to accept electoral college votes certified by the states or send them back to the states, I dismissed it out of hand. I knew that our founders would have never given authority to any one individual to decide who would be the American president. The presidency belongs to the American people, and any disputes about the election are resolved by the elected representatives of the people. And so it was very, very clear to me, in those difficult hours and those difficult days, by God's grace, I believe that we did our duty to support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
There were people in your inner circle, people that wrote checks to you, that were in your kind of accountability group, that, and you mentioned it in the new book, warned you, said, don't go on that ticket. It's going to ask too much of you. There is a sense, I think, for many Christians that you were essentially the Daniel in Babylon figure. That how did you see your responsibility when the Access Hollywood tapes come out, when all of it comes out? How do you then make a decision? that is the right decision for you, knowing there's a Mike Pence brand now that is well established as governor. You'd won, you'd risen to leadership, but there's a lot to put on the scale to go onto the ticket. What was the conversation like, and how did you come to a decision to say, if God wills, we're going to go forward?
Well, for us, I'll never forget when the first call came from an associate of Donald Trump's, asking if I would be willing to be considered to be vice president. And I must tell you, Jeff, I was surprised. My daughter that I wrote that book with, I'll never forget her, the day she told us at the cabin down in Brown County, Indiana, she said, "Well, Dad, we all saw this coming." I said,
Right.
"I didn't see it coming."
Why?
For the reason I'd actually supported another candidate in the Indiana primary in 2016
Right.
for president, and I never occurred to me that I would be on a list of
Two very different people.
But you know, when we received the call, Karen and I prayed about it immediately, and for us, it really came down to whether or not we thought we could help the country. So I'm someone that believes in servant leadership. I mean, we were in public life to serve, and after 8 years of an administration that I had labored against, and as a congressman, and labored under as a governor, I knew our country faced real challenges at home and abroad. And so when the opportunity came to be considered, I told the mutual friend of the Republican nominee, I said, well, the convention is just a few short weeks away, and I said, but for us to know whether or not this was a calling, I said we'd have to know two things. Number one, our family would have to know their family better, because everything we do as a family. And secondly, I said I'd like to know the job description. As a governor, you have the ability to have great impact on people's lives. And some vice presidents have been consequential in our history. Most have not. And I knew that only one person writes that job description. And so I said, I'm sure there's not enough time for us to meet, for our families to meet, so I won't be offended if it's not possible. And the next day, I got a call back from this mutual friend who said, not only did Mr. Trump not offended by what you said, he loved your answer, and he wants to invite you to come to Bedminster, bring your whole family, spend the whole weekend with his family, and you guys can spend a lot of time together talking through things. And it was that weekend that Karen and I went. Our daughter Charlotte went with us. My son's in the Marine Corps, and our daughter was in college and busy, but Charlotte was able to be with us, and we all spent time with the man I used to call Donald, and Melania, and he and I had very deep conversation. I'll never forget, I said to him, "Tell me about the job description." And he said, he said, "Active." And I said, "Well, how do you mean active?" And he said, he said, "You know Congress, and I'd like you to be active in our legislative agenda. You've been on the International Relations Committee. I'd like you to be active representing us around the world, and traveling the country." And so by the time we left the weekend, actually, we just had a lot of peace about it. I had Karen the same. We felt a great rapport despite a difference in backgrounds and experiences and personalities. We felt very comfortable with the man who had become the president and the woman who had become the first lady. And I was very comfortable with the job description. And so we when the call came, it was without hesitation that we said yes. And when the difficult moments in the campaign unfolded, Jeff, that you allude to, I did what I tried to do for the next 4 years, and that was to offer private counsel, to show grace and hopefully be a constructive voice among those that we're serving.
The president seemed to appreciate the fact that you told him that you prayed for him. Were there opportunities to do that in private? Did you ever get to the point where you're alone in the Oval Office together and can say, "Can we pray about this?" Or was it, "I'll take it to God in prayer," and he said, "I'll respect that"?
I still pray for President Trump. Did today. And I'd often take the occasion to remind him we're praying for him. You know, after those difficult days that we passed through in January of 2021, we sat down for the better part of an hour and a half, 5 days later. He had said all the things that needed to be said. He said that the people who had ransacked the Capitol would be held responsible. He committed to a peaceful transfer of power. Things were back on track. And we were very candid with one another in the conversations. And while we have an enduring difference about my duties that day, Jeff, we actually parted amicably when we left the White House 4 years ago. But there was a moment where he seemed particularly downcast, and it was in the waning weeks of our administration. And I said to him, sitting alone in the back room just off the Oval Office where we always had our lunch, I said, "Well, I want you to know I'm praying for you." Because I could sense he was deeply remorseful about what had happened. Yeah. Almost irrespective of whether he agreed with my position that I'd taken. I said, "I want you to know I'm praying for you." And his first response was, "Don't bother." And a little while later, when I was getting up to leave, we finished our meeting. I looked at him and I said, "Well, I guess there's two things we're probably never going to agree on." And he looked up, still seated at the table, and said, "What?" And I said, "Well, probably never going to agree on my duties on January 6th. And I said, "And I'm never going to stop praying for you." And he looked up at me with a faint smile and said, "That's right, Mike. Don't ever change." We had a great working relationship for 4 years. And not just a good relationship. I'm incredibly proud of the record of the Trump-Pence administration. Not that we didn't have differences, but I kept those differences in private until my oath to the Constitution and my public duties required me to do otherwise. But I'll always be proud of what we did together. And as I told him, I've never stopped praying for him, for his family, and as he prepares to take office once again, that'll never change.
Well, he was certainly very open to you and expressed, and told you what actually happened during that time.
I think what you get a sense from the Vice President is that prayer isn't a throwaway line. It isn't a Christian thing to say, that he is deeply dependent on God in these very difficult moments. And on January 6th and these other days following, that instinct to say, I'm way above my head in this, that I have to let God sort these issues out, and to say this to the most powerful man in the world that he was praying for him. I think that said a lot about his character.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Vice President Pence's high personal standard of ethics has often been a subject of criticism, even mockery. Mr. Pence's guardrails protecting his marriage to Karen and his family, viewed by some as impractical. I asked the Vice President, what if his brand of politics is outdated and impractical? How do you view these things today? And I think many people reading your story see it maybe as a bygone era of having people whose personal life and political life jibe. Plenty of people saying we don't need Sunday school teachers in political office. Why do you still think the personal is as important as the policy?
I think character is destiny for individuals and for nations. And Americans have always understood that the character of our leadership is as important as the direction of our leadership. I think that's what the vast majority of Americans still believe. But you're right, there are some voices in the public square that are dismissive of that. But I still remain confident that's what most of the American people believe. But I appreciate, Jeff, that you mentioned the book, because when I talk to candidates, and I still do, I try and encourage young men and women, whether it's here at Grove City College, these young people that are aspiring to serve in elected or appointed office. I always tell them you don't have to choose between living out your Christian faith and being in politics. You don't have to choose between those. You can do both. It's a matter of putting your faith first and your marriage and your family second ahead of your duties. And I was with a couple of police officers early today when I arrived in Pittsburgh. And one of them had already read the book, and sending a copy to the other. But they both said to me, in their lives, which they face much greater risks than people that serve in public office on a regular basis, both of them said that the key to their success is making sure they're making time for their families, for their wives and their children. And the truth is, Washington, D.C. is not a very family-friendly place. You've got to be intentional about it. I write in the book about early on in Congress, first invitation I got to go to the White House. I was a young member of Congress to sit down with President Bush and a few other members. It was a great opportunity, be noticed by people in the media, people back home. I could speak about the issues in Indiana and the values I came to advance. My wife informed me as I was breathlessly telling her that I had an invitation to go to the White House for a meeting. She said, well, that's Charlotte's first violin concert. She was in about the third grade and would not go on to be a concert violinist and was not one then. But that was a moment that, fortunately, we had already made decisions as a couple that what would prevail in those times. And so I graciously informed the White House that I had a family commitment, my daughter's violin concert, and I wouldn't be able to make it. And I have to tell you that one of the things I most admire about the Bush family, President George W. Bush, his father, the president, his extended family, is their deep commitment to their families. And when the topic of my family ever came up in the future with President Bush, he was always extremely supportive, appreciative, asked after the children, and because he knew that I shared the same passion that he had.
Did you lose anything by choosing family, by choosing your faith? Did you lose opportunities in advancement? And in the end, how have you reconciled the score on that?
Well, I honestly, sometimes, and I've told people here at Grove City, if you think that you're not giving things up to put a priority on your family and your career, you're kidding yourself. And if God was not real, it would always work against you. But one of my wife's favorite verses is, he prospers his beloved even when they sleep. I've learned through hard experience that when we make his priorities our priorities, he'll bless us in ways that go beyond our own abilities and experience. Not always in the way we want to be. I can tell you, politics, I've had my share of disappointments. Early in my career, and of course, I was on the ballot in 2020. Part of what made that whole experience painful for me was that I knew we had a lot more to do for the country and to build on the progress that we had made. But the peace that I have is that through all of it, we were able to, by God's grace, to make decisions. And our family's never been stronger, our marriage has never been stronger, and we're very confident about whatever the future holds for our family, that we'll face it together.
Wow, what wonderful guidance he is giving to the students at Grove City, really pointing them in the right direction.
There are very few role models in politics. There are plenty of people who can tell you how to get things done, how to be a political operator. But to have somebody who will actually say, no, re-rank everything, not politics first, God first, family second, and then your career a distant third. And it's something that just doesn't apply, Deborah, to politics. It's in all of life, in all of business. And I hope people tune in and that there's a revival of this kind of mentorship in America.
Yes, certainly. Well, January 20th, 2025 marks the inauguration of the 46th President of the United States and his new Vice President, J.D. Vance. Of course, by tradition, all former presidents and vice presidents have been invited to attend. And you asked Mr. Pence about what that historic day may look like for him and former Second Lady Karen Pence.
Final question. Are you going to the inaugural, and what are your thoughts as you have, you walk out, you'll be introduced, if you attend, and that conversation inevitably that will happen with the new president and President Biden and others, Vice President Quayle. What are you thinking about, and how are you praying and preparing for that day? What are your plans?
Well, I've been to, I think, 6 inaugurations ever since I was first elected in 2000, and it is a moment of great significance in the life of the nation. There's a committee, and invitations will go forward. We haven't received those yet, so we're sorting out our schedule and those plans. But it really is a moment, I think, of enormous importance. It's one of the reasons I felt so strongly about attending the inauguration 4 years ago. Just to be present, to I think particularly for the principals, for the president and the vice president that are coming in, the president and the vice president that are going out. It's important to be present to demonstrate the peaceful transfer of power. But whatever our role is, we'll mark that day with the same gratitude and appreciation for that great tradition in American democracy that'll be lived out again on January 20th.
Vice President Pence, thank you very, very much. It's an honor.
Great to see you, Jeff.
That was a really nice interview, and you really got so much out of him, and that's, I think, important for people to see and hear.
I think what you see in the vice president is someone who's a real person, but a real follower of Jesus. There are plenty of people who are advertised as Christians and often don't meet up to the public standard or even private standard. And what I saw in his actions and interactions off camera, the way he treated my son Teddy, who was with me that day, Andrew, our cameraman, the people around us, with such dignity, asking their name, looking them in the eye. It's the kind of leader that you want to have in public life. Even if he's never elected to public office again, you need to have people like Mike Pence at the center of our public life.
Right. A very kind person.
Indeed, yeah.
Well, thank you for watching this very special interview with former Vice President Mike Pence. The entire interview is available on our free Lighthouse TV app from your favorite app store.
For Deborah and the entire Morning Light team, I'm Jeff Coleman. Thanks for spending this time with us. Check on your neighbors. We look forward to facing the new year together with faith.